cgswot.com, and today we're going to have a look at the puppet pin tool in After Effects CS4, and this is the effect that we're going for. It's our worm character, and this character, believe it or not, is rigged and animated completely in After Effects. It starts its life as a still TGA tag image with transparency, and once we've rigged and animated the character, we'll create a quick little set with some lighting and a camera just to capture the final effect. But the effect itself is not really what we're shooting for. It's just to open up some knowledge on this feature and to get you thinking about how you could possibly incorporate this feature into your work. So we'll get started. This is the character, and I quickly made it in 3D Studio Max just using some sub-poly modeling. I'll probably do a tutorial at a later date, just to, it's a bit of an introductory sort of lesson on sub-poly modeling or mesh smooth modeling in 3D Studio Max, and it's a very simple character. And if I just toggle transparency here, you'll see that he has transparency. It was a TGA with a pre-multiplied alpha on black, and we've brought that in. So let's get started. We'll create a new composition. I'm going to be using the PAL D1DV square pixels, 25 frames per second and 10 seconds long. Click OK to that, and I'll just highlight that in the project window, hit enter, and we'll call this the master comp. And we'll drag our worm character down into the comp, and with it highlighted we're going to pre-compose it. So we'll select layer, pre-compose, and we'll call this worm cycle, and we'll leave all attributes in the master comp and open in new composition. Click OK. Now up the top here is the puppet pin tool. It's just next to the eraser, and if we select and highlight it, you'll see that it turns into a pin. And if we click, the first one we need to click is somewhere in the head here, towards the bottom, just there. Next one is where the head meets the neck. Click about there. And the next one is 2 segments back about here. Then we'll go to where it's the thickest, where the body is the thickest, which is around this area here, and we'll put one there and one there. Then we'll come back a few segments and place another one there, and one more before the end of the tail, probably about here, and one in the last segment there. Now if I switch over to the move tool, you'll see that this is pretty much the way puppet pin works. And if you start moving it too erratically, you'll find that your mesh will tear apart. Now up the top here, with the puppet pin tool selected, I can show and hide mesh, and I'll just click that and you'll see basically what the mesh looks like, and that'll give you an indication of how After Effects has broken up this image to be animated using that method. So if we come down into, I'll just give us a bit of room. If we come down into the worm layer, you'll see that the puppet tool is in fact an effect, and with the name puppet, and it also has a mesh layer, and if we click that down, you'll see that it has the number of triangles which we can increase and decrease, and we can also increase this expansion of those triangles, which basically expands the inclusion of those triangles and the relative mesh or image. But the important one for this lesson is deform. If I click that, you'll see that our 8 pins that we created are here layered from 1 to 8, and as I click on them you'll see them highlighted in the viewport. So if I highlight puppet pin 1 and I'll just hit enter, I'll just rename it head, and we won't go through and rename all of them, but if we rename the head and the tail, and these two in the center, which are going to be our main movers. So if we just click on this one here, we'll rename that one lift pin 4, and we'll rename this one lift pin 5. The others we don't really need to be concerned with them. We can find our way around these layers now. You'll also notice that puppet pin creates a keyframe at frame 0, which is basically the starting pose of the character in this example, but of the object, and that's very important to remember, that it creates a keyframe with the starting pose, and we're going to use that. So just with the layer selected, we're going to hit U to bring up the position information, and you'll see that we have a position keyframe for all of the pins. Now what we're going to do is animate this character with a 10 frame interval between each movement, and try to keep it fairly uniform for the purpose of this tutorial. So we've got our first keyframe. Let's come through to frame 10, which we can see up here, and let's select our lift movers, or our lift pins, and we're going to move them up, and we're going to move them forward, and then we're going to select our last 3 pins, and we're going to slide them with the shift held down forward. Don't worry at this stage that it's bowing down lower than our floor level will be. We'll correct that later on. Maybe grab these lift ones and just a little bit more forward and down just a tad, probably about sort of halfway between that distance, and you'll see that it's creating that movement there. Now we'll come through to frame 20, and what we'll do is you'll notice at frame 10 that there is no keyframes appearing for head pin, pin 1, pin 2 and pin 3. Now we need keyframes there because we need to maintain that position while the tail moves up and the body moves up. So while we're at frame 10, just slide your mouse up the keyframe creation toggle on the side here, and that maintains that first position. Now we'll come through to frame 20. We're going to select all of the keyframes from frame 0. So that's it there. We're going to go Control C and Control V, which should bring everything back to where it was, and you'll see now we have a cycle. There we go. Now what we're going to do is keep the cursor on frame 20. We're going to highlight all of the keyframes back to frame 0, Control C and Control V, and what we've done is created 2 loops. Then we'll move through to frame 40, Control V to paste again, move through to frame 60, Control V, and so on. We'll keep doing that until we have our cycle all the way along. Now there are other ways that you can create an animation loop and repeat it, but by doing it this way we can always come back into this comp later on and put some fine adjustment on this so that it isn't so repetitive. And we'll just go to this last guy here, and we now have our animation loop. Now what we'll do is we need to stop anything going lower than the floor of the character. So first we need to, something in there to reference as the floor. So we'll create a new solid, go layer, new, solid. We'll make it black. Go OK, and we'll just slide it down until, and we'll just sit on the first keyframe and line it up with the bottom of the character, which is about, that should do us. Now what we can do is just hit T to bring up opacity, and we'll lower that to 80 so that we can just see, or maybe even a little lower. We'll lower that to 70 just so that we can see anything that goes beneath it, like here. And we'll just zoom in there a little bit, and this is where we're going to use another tool that comes with Puppet Pin, and that's the Puppet Starch tool, which is in the drop down menu along with Puppet Pin. And we're just going to starch this guy. Make sure that we've got our worm layer selected and not the solid. And if we're through to frame 10, then which is the high point of the animation, we'll just come out just slightly. You'll see that when you use the starch tool, the mesh shows up, and what we're looking for, each yellow cross represents a pin, and what we're looking for, the pin, the mesh that is represented here that goes underneath is the mesh in between this pin here and this pin here. So if we pop that in there, click again, what we're doing is filling in that mesh with a bit of starch, which stops, basically it minimizes the amount of effect of the Puppet Pin tool, and it'll be fine to just keep moving along the tail and adding these in. And we'll try one back here to see if we can bring it up, and that's done. That's pretty much done what we needed. So you'll see that that maintains it underneath there now. And we'll do the same at the front. Try and bring this up. That's pretty close. And might as well put a little bit on the head, just to stiffen it up a little bit. And that's probably pretty close. And I'll just switch off the mesh. And I'll come out, and you'll see that we're staying on that horizon line there now. So that's looking pretty good, and I'll just use the move tool now, and we'll scrub through, and it looks like it's going to be fine. So we'll get rid of that black solid. We'll move back into the master comp, and you'll see that it's a little larger than our comp, so we'll scale it down slightly, and we'll move it to the left for now. It's okay because we're going to be using a camera, so position isn't that important at this point in time. Now we'll create a new null object by selecting layer, new, null object, and we'll click enter, and we'll call it worm mover. And we'll reposition it over at the head of the worm, where it reaches the bottom, about there. Now we'll just bring up our parent column, and we will parent the worm cycle layer to worm mover. And now if we move worm mover, it will follow. Now we're remembering that our cycle is done to 10 frame intervals with a 20 frame cycle. So we will move across to frame 10 and click the stopwatch for position, and that puts a keyframe at frame 10. We might as well put one at frame 0 as well, and that way the head doesn't move, which is what we want for the first 10 frames. Then we come through to frame 20. I'll just get rid of this parent layer, don't need that at the moment. We're now at frame 20, and we'll grab the null object and move it about the width of a standard null box, but you'll get a feel for how far the worm needs to move it in each cycle. And we're going to use the same technique that we used for the last for the cycle, which is to select all 3 keyframes, Control C, Control V. No, we can't actually. Okay, so we're going to come out now to frame 30 and click on a keyframe because we don't want any movement. So the way this null is to be animated is only half of the cycle is movement, the other half is static. So once we get a few here, you'll see what I mean. So it pauses, then moves, then pauses, then moves. So we'll come through now to frame 50, click on a keyframe, then frame 60, and move it. Come through to 70, click on a keyframe, come through to 80 and move it. And we're holding down the shift button while we move, and that keeps us on a good horizontal line. We'll come across now to 90, click on a keyframe, 100 and move it. Just slide across a little bit, come across to 110, click on a keyframe, and 120, we'll move it, and 130, click on a keyframe, just type in here. Just by clicking that box we can bring this up here, and then 140, click on a keyframe. Well, that should have been a move actually on 140. Perhaps not. Still 140. Yes, it was. It was a move. Come through to 150. Click on a keyframe. 160. Move. Just come out a little bit. Come through to 170. Keyframe. 180. Remove. 190. Keyframe. 200. Move. 210. Keyframe. 220, move, 230, keyframe, 240, move, and 250, keyframe. Okay, now if we click on position, we can center this up a little bit. Notice when I click on position, it grabs all of the keyframes, and what we want to do is just use the coordinate system here to bring it back across. Out there. And if we have a quick render, let's see what it looks like. And there we go. It seems to work okay. Come in a little bit. Center it up. And that's fine. Now you might have noticed from the example that we had some secondary animation happening on the antenna. And we can go back and do that now. If we go back to the worm cycle, highlight the worm, we want to come in here, and with the pin tool we'll click at the base of the antenna, one halfway up and one on the end. Now with the move tool we'll slide down, and notice here we have 3 new pins, pin 8, 9 and 10. We'll just bring up the position for those. You'll notice that it created a keyframe for each back here, which we want at the start. So let's just grab those and drag them to the start. We'll come through to frame 10 and we'll move the top one down to here, middle one down a little bit, and move that guy back a bit, something like that. And we use the same process as before, where we select the first 3, Control C, come through to frame 20, Control V, and that way we have our cycle. And we're going to select all of these guys and sit on that last one, Control C, Control V, come through, Control V, come through, Control V, Control V, and so on. But what we want to do with these guys is to offset them, because secondary animation always looks best when it's offset from the main animation, where it gives the impression of follow through, that it's caused by another action. So we'll grab Control V, and it's fortunate that that last copy went beyond our 250 frames, because if we click position on each of these, it'll select all of the keyframes, and if we slide in here, we'll go to position frame 5, and we're going to bring these to 5, and now you'll see that the keyframes are offset. And when we come back into our master comp and give that a quick render, you'll see that there's some follow through there. So that's almost it for the animation. Just one more thing, we'll go back to worm cycle, and with continue clicking the position with your control held down to get all of these keyframes, so that we've got every keyframe selected. And what we want to do is right click on one of the keyframes, come down to keyframe assistant, easy ease, or F9 is the hotkey, and that just gives a little bit of smooth motion and for a snail, for a worm, that's probably what we want. Now we're going to do the same for the worm mover, so select those and animation, keyframe assistant, easy ease, or F9. Okay, so that's our worm animated across the stage. Looks pretty funny there in high speed, but that's all the movement that we're going to need. Okay, so let's create a little bit of a stage for this guy, to a little bit of a set. So click Layer, New, Solid. We're going to name this Floor, and comp size is fine for now. And we're going to give it a sort of a dirty colour in here, sort of a mid-tone with a yellow hint. Click OK. And the other thing we're going to do is turn our, and we'll drag that floor to the bottom. We're going to turn our worm and our worm cycle layers into 3D layers, and we're also going to turn our floor into a 3D layer. We're going to take the floor, use our rotation tool, and we're going to rotate it 90 degrees, and if you hold the shift button while you rotate it'll lock to 90 degrees. And what we're going to do, if we come halfway through the animation, you'll see that we can line the floor up with the worm. That's about it there, and we'll scale it and scale it in width to about there, and that's going to work fine. So there's our floor, and what we're going to do is Control D on the floor to duplicate it, Control D, and we're going to rename this wall. I'm going to highlight it and rotate it 90 degrees back up, and we're going to push it back and slide it up, and it's probably a little bit large, so we'll scale it down a little bit and bring it down. And just to make life a little easier for us, we'll give the floor some texture for now. So with the floor selected, in the effects panel, click or effect, noise and grain, fractal noise, and we want overlay as the method, or actually multiply as the method. Multiply is fine. Now we're going to bring the contrast out of it a little bit. Brightness we'll leave where it was, 0, and we'll leave that there for now. We're just going to go to a top view for a moment, and we're going to select our worm mover, and we're going to slide it forward. Whoop. Just undo that. Select our worm mover position, and we're going to bring it okay, we'll leave that where it is. and that should be fine. Active camera. Now we're going to create a new camera using layer, new, camera, and 35mm preset is fine. We might as well go to that camera view, and we're going to slide in just a little bit on the camera using the camera control, track Z. Just come in a little bit there. And we'll probably move it across to about here, just so that worm is just off screen, and that's going to work fine. Now the wall, in fact the floor, we're going to generate a grid, and we want normal as the blending mode. We want something in that same sort of color range, but much darker, something like about there. And we want to shrink the border just a tad, and that's fine. And the wall, we might as well copy the fractal noise, Control C, and highlight the wall, Control V, and that gives us fractal noise there. Now it does look a little bit continuous, but we'll fix that as soon as we put a light in here. So up the top, layer, new, and light. And the type of light we want is a point light. 100% is fine for now. White is never the best. I'd try to avoid using white lights. We'll go in here in the yellow range and just sort of bring it in so it's a sort of a creamier colour, and go okay. And now you'll see that we're starting to get something that's looking a little nicer. Now we'll just go to a top view and line this light up a little better. 4 views we don't need. Top view, there we go. And we want the light to be off to the left a little bit, out in front. Remembering this is our camera here, so that's probably pretty good for the light. Looks like our base, our floor is a little big. Let's bring that in a little bit, remembering that the camera can only sort of see that, and we'll slide it forward a bit as well. And I'll just show you from a custom view what that scene is starting to look like. Slide that down a little bit, like so. And if I just orbit around, you'll see that that's pretty much what we're getting. I'll probably go a little bit higher on this light, just up on the Y. And that seems to be working okay. So we'll go back to our active camera, or camera 1. And the first thing we want to do is switch on shadows for the camera, or check that they're on, and they are. I might increase the intensity by a little bit, 130. And what we want to do is play with some of the materials of these objects. The worm cycle, we want to go into the material objects of the worm cycle and switch on cast shadows, and straight away you see that there's a bit of a shadow there. If we just go into a front view and move that light down just a bit, just so we get a bit more shadow happening on the wall, something like that. Go back to camera view, and the other thing we'll do with the light, if we slide up to the light, we'll just increase the shadow diffusion to about 40 pixels, and you'll see there that it's given us a bit of a soft shadow there now, and that looks pretty good. and what we want to do is select the wall and just come down to its material properties and just decrease the diffuse a little bit. It's a little bit bright. And the shininess, we can probably bring the shininess up a little bit and then maybe bring the diffuse up a bit more, like so. And we can make some similar modifications to the floor. Just sort of bring the shininess up a tad, probably 50-ish, 50%. Specular, increase it. Diffusion, bring it up a bit. There we go. Okay. Now we're going to add an effect to the worm cycle, and if you come over to your effect presets and type in glass, you'll actually get CC glass in stylize, and we'll drag that onto the worm cycle, and you'll see straight away if I switch that on and off, we're getting some interactivity. Now it's blooming right out, and CC glass actually has some displacement, and if I bring the displacement down to about 5 and the height down to about 5 and the softness down to about 2, I can increase the specular level, decrease the diffusion, or decrease the ambient, increase the roughness, would help if I switched the effect on. Leave the roughness on about 0.25, leave the metal high, specular, I like a bit of specular, probably about 70. Diffuse, let's bring the diffuse down a little bit, bring the ambient down a little bit, or actually switch it off and just maybe bring the diffuse up a little bit more. Let's increase the height to 10. We'll knock that back to 8. Displace, we'll keep on 10. Softness down to 1. And probably a bit more specular, a little bit less diffuse, like so. And what you'll see is that we actually have the character is reacting to the light. We're getting some specular level happening across it, as the character moves across the stage. The specular is actually increasing and decreasing as it goes. And so there we have it. So we're just about done. All we need to do now is, in fact, I think it'd probably do well if we had some little bit of occluded shadow or global illumination type shadow happening on the base of it. So what we're going to do is copy the worm cycle by clicking Control D. Now the bottom copy we're going to rotate on the X, .90 degrees, and then we're going to move it down until it's just above the floor so that it's visible, just like that. And we'll get rid of glass, we don't need that on that layer, and we'll add or generate a fill, and we'll make it black. Go OK to that, and you'll see now that we're getting this shadow underneath the character. And we'll also introduce a blur, fast blur of about 20, so that's pretty considerable. Maybe even go 35. And we'll click T and reduce the opacity down to about 60. And now we have some nice occluded shadows underneath it. So there's the main shadow that's casting along the back there, and I think we should probably just bring our light down slightly. So if we just go to our light, hit P, bring up position, we can play with our light a little bit here. Just bring it down a little lower, right there, and that's looking pretty good. And the last thing we need to do is select the camera, hit AA to bring up its options, and we're going to switch on depth of field, and we're going to increase it to about 250, and you'll see that our foreground just goes blurry there, which is the effect we're going for. And we might as well put an adjustment layer over the top and tweak the levels slightly. So if we go layer, new, adjustment layer, and we'll use a color correct, brightness contrast, we'll bring the brightness up slightly, about 10, and the contrast up slightly. I think we could probably decrease. We'll just go into the worm, not the shadow worm but the actual coloured worm, and go into the material options, and we will bring down the diffusion slightly. It's a little bit bright. Bring up the shininess, just so that it looks like it moves out of that light, comes into the light and moves away and out of the light. And that looks pretty good. So we'll just give that a quick RAM preview. Slide this up a little. So what we've done there is we've used the puppet pin tool to rig our character in After Effects, starting with a still image, and sky's the limit as to what image you use. Whether you use a character, you may use a picture of grandma and get her to dance around in your Christmas photo. Basically, the tool, I tried to keep it simple and give you an opportunity to sort of grasp a bit of the understanding of how it works. Remember, the pins are to be treated as movers and anchor points, and you need keyframes to anchor certain parts and to move certain parts of the geometry. And we'll call it geometry because it is basically a mesh placed over the top of the puppet tool, or over the image. So our RAM preview is almost done here, and of course we could have spent a lot more time on the background and various things, but the purpose of the tutorial was for the puppet pin tool, and we've achieved that. So feel free to do the effect and send me a rendered still JPEG, nothing over 5 megs of course, and let me have a look at your end product, or post it on YouTube and send me a link, and I'd love to have a look at what people have done out there with the puppet tool. So for now, that's it for me. I've been Dave Scotland for cgswot.com, and make sure you check out the site regularly for new tutorials. Until next time, bye for now.